What do you think was the best decision you made in 2018?
I think 2018 was generally a good year, but the decision I'm most pleased about was the idea to launch and hopefully complete by 2025 this $100 million fund to recruit the best and brightest students from Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, Iraq, and Jordan. This will complement our MasterCard and other programs by getting the really best and brightest people from this part of the world to do their undergraduate education at AUB.
So your multi-generational links to AUB run really deep, and you're the first president with so many family links at the university. How has your family helped you prepare for this position and influenced you for this position?
Sure. So I think, frankly, Howard Bliss and Peter Dorman had significant family links also, as did Bayard Dodge. I have the most multi-generational links, you're right. My two great-grandfathers, both of my grandfathers, both of my parents, both of my wife's parents, and my wife and I started here. I think it taught me from childhood to love and appreciate this university, to understand what it stands for, how important that is for us as a peoples of the Arab world, for Lebanon in particular, for people from Palestine, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, the Gulf, the whole world. It's a university that truly stands for our very best values, and it taught me to nurture and cultivate and love and respect, and on some occasions to protect these values.
So after Robert Haddad was appointed in 1993, you're only the second president of Arab descent. How do you feel this contributes to your decision-making process? Does it give you a privilege or an advantage?
I think I have an advantage. Dr. Haddad, who I knew, doesn't. Bob spent his junior year abroad here. I knew him since my childhood, but he didn't grow up in this university or around it. I think Peter Dorman and I, like previous generation presidents, we grew up around this university. John Kirkwood was dean for many years, and then he was president. And when you grow up around this university, you have tremendous ties to it, as we discussed. As the second Arab American and as the first Lebanese, it's an advantage in that you understand the culture, both its strengths and its challenges, and also you're quite determined to make sure you're not the last Lebanese American president that they select. So I'm conscious of doing a good job and turning the university over in much better shape than what we founded it.
What are the common links between medicine and decision-making that you find here at AUB?
So I think medicine is a field where you cannot put off some decisions, but you don't rush others. What do I mean by that? With a cancer patient or a patient with a disease in general, you don't want to rush your decision making. The basic tenet being, under pressure, slow things down, try to bring in as many factors as you can, try to achieve consensus of you and the team, because medicine's also a multidisciplinary field, but also recognize that you won't always have unanimity, whether between you and the patient or you and the community. Make the best possible decision at that time, but be brave enough to change that decision if you discover that it wasn't the best decision.
And what's one thing you struggled with in your days at the UB?
What's one? I struggled with many things in my days at AUB. AUB is in the midst of a region that is struggling as a whole. I think if you look at the economic growth of all the Arab world, it's been probably unbalanced, negative during the time that I've been here, whereas the US, which I left, has been booming economically, and that impacts our students' ability to pay and our patients' ability to pay. So I think the biggest decisions that I struggle with are to try to make sure that we have the ability to help as many people that we can, as well as we possibly can, and that's not easy. What do I mean by that? You're apportioning resources, you're making decisions that affect many, many people without a lot of margin. And we're cognizant of our tremendous influence in Lebanon and the region. So none of the decisions are all that easy.
Who are your mentors or leaders that you feel like they inspired you, and why?
So my parents, both my mother and my father, were wonderful mentors growing up. My younger brother, even though he's younger than me, is a brilliant and incredibly kind person. He impacted me at least as much as my parents. He always did the right thing. He was very brave and very quiet, still is. My wife is probably my biggest inspiration. She is very unselfish and very measured in her responses. Sometimes I can be quick to decide, but she's taught me to slow down. I was lucky. I've had many mentors throughout my career. As an undergraduate, I had a Catholic priest, believe it or not, Tom Garapi, who was our college dean. Each dean at each college at Yale has a residential college dean. In medical school, Leslie Bayer on the clinical side, and Tom Garrett on the clinical side, and Bernie Weinstein, my lab boss, were all wonderful leaders. In my residency, I had 4 wonderful attendings, each of whom taught me how magnificent it is to care for patients. They were Bob Witzberg, Jim Heffernan, John Pearson, and Hap Farber, wonderful men. And then in my fellowship, I had 2 good fellowship mentors in Mike Atkins and Dan Karp. But probably the most important mentor I've had academically is a man called Won Ki Hong, a Korean American who passed away early this January. He was my mentor at MD Anderson. He had an enormous impact on me. And he and Howard Koh, who was my attending as an intern, as a resident, and became Secretary for Health and Human Services for the United States for 6 years. He was the commencement speaker this last year. Probably are the 2 people who had the greatest influence on me, other than my wife, my parents, and others, because they always did the right thing in difficult circumstances with different style. Ironically, both are Korean Americans. I also had some wonderful mentors at Emory, including Mike Johns and Rain Sorrell and Tom Lawley, our dean.
In your opinion, what is AUB's cancer? As in, what is the significant problem that AUB is facing that is hindering its growth right now?
Sure. So as an oncologist, I don't think AUB has a cancer. I'm just going to be very blunt. I think AUB has challenges. You could call them precancers, you could call them dysregulation. So what are the major problems we face? One is this culture of complaining, unfortunately, that's not restricted to AUB, but it's regionally prevalent. Hard work doesn't solve every problem. There are some things you can work very hard and you can't solve. And I think a lot of our discussions here would be better if we could have them internally, openly, honestly, town halls, meetings, wherever you want, as opposed to through third parties and newspapers and gossip. That's not unique to AUB, that's an academic problem, but it's a little accentuated here. And I don't think it's a particularly helpful habit. Having said that, it's a minor problem, to be honest. Our biggest problem is the shortage of resources that we have. Frankly speaking, AUB did not get into the business of building a serious endowment until Dick Debs became board chair almost 30 years ago, less than 30 years ago. Now we have a significant endowment, but not nearly enough to make sure that our 9,400 students, our 1,200 faculty, and 5,000 non-academic staff can have their futures reassured. We're working on that. But given the fact that now 60% of our kids are receiving some form of scholarship or financial aid, and I estimate that by 2030, we will be at 70%. I'd like to build that more. I think having significant ability to flex to important projects, be it scholarships, be it buildings, be it academic programs, is our most important priority. And that's something I'd like to be in a much better shape.
Are there any aspects from your own alma mater, such as Yale University and Columbia MS, that you would like to integrate into AUB?
I'd love their endowments, for one. Yale has the second biggest endowment at 30-something billion. No, I'm just joking. I enjoyed Yale, and I enjoyed Columbia even more. I enjoyed Yale because I really loved the classics courses I took. It helped me integrate that into being a physician, being an adult, being a human being. And I loved the sciences, too. I don't think it was superior education to the 1 year I did at AUB. It was just a little bit different, and I think the two were complementary. Columbia was very impactful on me, probably the most impactful of my teaching institutions, because it taught me about the value of integrating science along with humanism, into your decision-making, all decision-making. The idea that you can learn to read and become a lifelong learner and that should inform your decision making. You could never quite stop reading because the field was moving so quickly, but at the same time you couldn't lose your humanism. Those are the greatest lessons I learned from my alma maters.
All right, I guess I'm next. AUB currently holds place number 237 in the QS World Rankings for 2019. In your opinion, what will it take for AUB to be one of the top 100 in the world?
Sure. So I think to be one of the top 100 in the world, in addition to substantially upgrading our resources, we need to be highly selective in the students we take. You guys are all among the best and brightest, but our pool where we draw from is not as large as it should be. I'd like to see us eventually get something like 30,000 applications for our undergraduate slots. It's about 2,000 per year. So that would be a good number for me. I'd like to get them from all over the world. Diversity is not a problem. Already 90 countries send us students. We are the premier university undergraduate in Lebanon and the Arab world. But I'd like us to go to the next step and really be recognized as one of those top universities. That's from the patient perspective, student perspective. From the patient perspective, what I'd like us to do is we're upgrading our medical center, but I'd like that medical center to become more than just the one we have here, to have a series of clinics or hospital affiliations. We're starting this under the current administration that spread not just throughout the country, but the region. So there is an AUB brand that would help us. Finally, it's all about research. So what does it take for us to be really competitive with the top universities in research? In addition to resources, we need to bring faculty members here and empower them to succeed so they attract the best students along with AUB. And that's going to be a substantial increase in the resources. In 3 years, we've increased the amount of internal funding for research by 60%, but that's not nearly enough. So we need to upgrade our campus. We have some old buildings that need to be renovated. We need to add resources, and we need to have the best and brightest students identify this as the university they want to go to, ideally between Greece to the west and I would say Afghanistan to the east, okay? From South Africa to the south to Russia to the north. If we can capture the best and brightest kids from that region, and as well as kids from America, China, India, Iran, everywhere, that would be when we know we're top 100, no matter what the rankings are.
Okay. I have another question for you. We know that AUB is run by Lebanese people, and they have, certain tendencies, like maybe they'll let things slide if you know somebody that they know, things like that. But these practices aren't tolerated in America, and I'm not saying that it happens all the time at AUB, but we are Lebanese at heart. So therefore, what I want to ask you is, what makes the American University of Beirut truly American?
Okay. So first of all, I respectfully disagree. AUB is run by me. I don't let things slide. But maybe at levels below me that happens, and typically when people report it to me, we correct it fairly quickly and fairly firmly. Just because you don't see people being fired or leaving doesn't mean that that's not what's happening. We tend to run a tight ship, and it is an American university. We hold people accountable. We don't allow any sectarian agendas. We don't have the infamous Sittu Mukarrar in this university, okay? We pick the best and brightest, irrespective of whether they're Lebanese, Palestinians, Syrians, Ukrainian, Chinese, American, Canadian, doesn't matter. And that's our practice. If this is happening on different levels, we would very much like to know about it. You say people let things slide. I think people in Lebanon, in my impression, having been here mostly until before my 19th birthday and having returned just before my 52nd, is that people get used to business as usual. And I'm not a business as usual type of person. And this is changing already and will change further. What's American about the university, what's most American, is its values. The values of egalitarianism, of non-tolerance for racism, of creating opportunities, of, frankly, being aspirational. I think these are qualities we today promote, represent, aspire to, and can honestly adhere to better even than the American government. So we are more American in our values than the American government, with all due respect to that government, because we try to represent to the most important people, which are you guys, the very best and brightest of American values, which include, in the final analysis, inclusiveness.
And finally from me, I just want to ask if AUB is planning on expanding its array of majors. There are some majors in other universities that we don't have, like interior design, pharmacy, or even new innovative ones like aerospace engineering and nanotechnology. Is that on AUB's agenda anytime soon?
Yes, it is. It's part of our strategic plan and our campus master plan to expand potentially some new majors, whether in technology, whether in culture. It could be something like cinema down the line, or theater. You could expand that. Yes, with regard to technology, we're interested in big data and in space exploration. There are a number of areas we're interested in, but we want to only roll them out when we can be competitive and we can meet a need. We think differently, I think, than prior administrations, not necessarily the last one, which may well have thought like us, but than prior administrations, in that our responsibility to you doesn't end the day we give you your degree. So we want to make sure if we're picking new majors, that you're going to be competitive in the job market or in graduate schools. We feel a great sense of responsibility towards our students, faculty, staff, and alumni.
Okay, beautiful, thank you.
Sure.
So drawing from your experience, what's one piece of advice that you'd give to university students at AUB today?
I think the best piece of advice I can give to university students at AUB is to try to enjoy the totality of the experience. When I went to school, you used to hear about your curriculars and your extracurriculars, with the implication being extra was far less important than curricular. Extra was in the few moments of time when you had nothing else to do, sure, go play music, play sports, participate in a club. I think we'd like to see the emergence of an ethos, of an AUB experience, not just an education, but really the student experience at AUB. Enjoy all of it, allow yourself to make mistakes, allow yourself to stumble, take difficult courses and difficult extracurriculars, challenge yourself, but in the end, use this experience to grow as a person.
AUB, no matter how hard it seems to be trying, it is still not fully accessible to the physically impaired. For example, there is no feasible way to get from lower to upper campus in time for class if one was slightly physically impaired. Are there any plans regarding these issues?
Yes, actually the accessibility issue is a big part of our campus master plan, but we'd like to do it in a way that is sustainable, because sustainability is among our top priorities, as is accountability, to go back to your previous question, but also in a way that doesn't really alter the nature of this beautiful campus. One of the things we'd eventually like to see is the idea of non-gas emitting, eventually, hopefully, self-driven shuttle electrical cars taking people back and forth throughout the campus, okay?
Tramway.
What?
Like a tramway,
I'm not sure like a tramway, but like initially a system which picks people up, maybe several at a time from lower to upper campus. But we're looking at the design of our wonderful older buildings, many of which are not accessible to people with disabilities, and see how we can improve them. We're going to plan in the next 12 to 15 plus years, not all of which I intend to be here, at least at this point, to upgrade the campus with the beautiful buildings we have, but also to build new buildings that allow for different types of teaching. And those types of teaching may actually be easier for young folks or senior folks with disabilities, group-led projects, non-classical classrooms, distance learning. These are things we'd like to add to make our campus more accessible, but not less beautiful.
Don't you think that the hourly fees for the work-study program are particularly low, especially in comparison to other universities?
So I don't know the details of the work-study program dollars, but the provost's office is in a major program to upgrade graduate assistantships and other things. We will, of course, look at work-study programs. You're talking about for undergraduate students, I assume. And we recognize the limitations of folks' financial situations and economic situations in this particular time. Part of our challenge, quite candidly, is being in Lebanon with more than 80-something% of our students being from Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, and the Arab world. More and more of our students don't have the resources to pay tuition, room, board, books, everything else. And we want to create opportunities for them to have better lives so that they in turn can make the lives of others more abundant. Not all of that will be feasible from our financial resources, but if we continue to build relationships with the private sector and with others, I think we can create better opportunities for joint work-study projects that are more financially competitive. That is the plan. It's not going to happen overnight, but yes, we would like to raise your hourly take-home.
Thank you.
I know you touched on this earlier, but maybe we can elaborate. AUB is known to be one of the oldest universities in the region and is starting to show on a few of its buildings, like Fisk and Nicely. Are there any plans to renovate in the near future?
Yes, there are. So we started with Penrose because that dorm was an atrocity, frankly, and that will be reopened in next summer, okay? We'll have probably a grand opening at the time the trustees come in September, but by then we'll already have kids in the dorms. We've gotten a significant donation from a trustee to start Fisk. We need to find some more funds because that's a $10 million upgrade. Nicely, we've made some proposals. We haven't gotten help. But we do have money set aside from our own capital expenses to renovate these buildings. I made the remark that Nicely Hall looks a little too much like it looked when I studied there in 1981, and that's uncomfortable for me. I want you to have the very best experience possible. Can't fix everything overnight. But yes, we are working in parallel at upgrading the beautiful existing facilities as well as creating new ones.
That's about it.
That's all.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.